Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another Hearthstone introductory deck guide. I'm Jarisar, and as you've probably gathered from the image behind me, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about Murlocs. And specifically, a type of deck that was made possible thanks to League of Explorers. Now, League of Explorers has changed the meta in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. You have all kinds of decks that previously weren't even feasible that are now popping out of the woodwork, and a lot of interesting varied plays are coming out of the new expansion. But specifically, Murloc Paladins have been particularly powerful and really quite popular at the moment. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the general makeup of those kind of decks, what kind of cards to expect, and why those decks work the way they do, so that you can hopefully get a good bit of basic knowledge about how you can go about building your own. So before we get into anything specific, let's take a look at the neutral Murloc cards. You're not going to have all of these Murloc cards in any deck. I don't think I've ever seen a Murloc deck that uses every Murloc in the game, neutral one anyway. And of course there are other Murloc cards that are class specific, but these tend to be the ones that you normally see. But specifically here for Murloc Paladin, I want to really focus our attention on the top row. These are going to be the cards that form the core of the combinations that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. And the reason it's a Murloc Paladin is specifically because of the Paladin cards as well. So if I show you the Paladin Murloc cards, there aren't that many, there are just two of them. Murloc Knight, of course, an incredibly powerful mid-range card, and used in a number of decks. It's not just a Murloc deck card, you can see it in, frankly, quite a lot of other Paladin decks as well. Really, really good card, but specifically what we're looking at today is this card, Anyfin Can Happen. This is a really, really awesome card because it allows for some crazy combos to take place. So you play Anyfin Can Happen and it summons 7 Murlocs that died this game. All fairly self-explanatory. It costs 10 mana. It obviously isn't very aggro because it does cost 10 mana after all. But the kind of combinations you can get off the back of it are incredible. One of the combos, and one of the most popular combos actually, is this one that you see on your screen right now. A lot of decks actually only have 5 Murlocs in them, so that once you've played out all the Murlocs, you know exactly what's going to happen when Anyfin Can Happen is played out onto the board. You have 2 Bluegill Warriors, 2 Murloc War Leaders, and an old Murkeye. This combo does 22 damage, so I'm going to break that down for you now. The Bluegill Warriors are 2-1 with charge, so that's 4 damage right off the bat. You then have your 2 Murloc War Leaders. Now first, it's important to note they don't have charge. So when you play Anyfin Can Happen, the War Leaders simply can't do any damage, fine. But they give all other Murlocs +2. So all of a sudden, those Bluegill Warriors we were talking about previously, instead of +2/+2, they have 6 attack each. And that's very, very powerful. So that's 12 damage with charge, basically, right off the bat. You then have Old Murkeye. Now Old Murkeye is a 2/4 by default, and it's got +1 attack for every other Murloc on the battlefield, and of course, Old Murkeye has charge. There are 4 other Murlocs on the battlefield, so that instantly brings Old Murkeye up to 6. Now, we have 2 Murloc War Leaders as well, and each one of those gives Old Murkeye +2. 6 +2 is 10. So we have 10 damage from Old Murkeye, and 12 more damage from the Bluegill Warriors gives you 22 damage. All fairly self-explanatory. There's then a second version of the combo, and I'm going to show you this because there's actually a deck that I've got that includes this that I'll show you a little bit later on, that contains 2 more cards as part of the combo. And this is a little bit less, how shall we say, less common, a bit more rare. And it's because it includes 2 cards that frankly just are not as good. So it's the same combo, but we've got 2 Grimscale Oracles as well. And each of these Grimscale Oracles give all other Murlocs +1 attack. So that means you have +1 attack, well +2 attack because there are 2 of them, for each of the Bluegill Warriors and Old Murkeye. You then, of course, also have the bonus that Grimscale Oracle gives Old Murkeye because there are more Murlocs on the board. You get the idea. Basically, this combo, when you add it all up, does 30 damage. So you can do 22 damage in a 1-turn kill, or you can do 30 damage in a 1-turn kill with these combos. And these decks tend to only have these Murlocs in them a lot of the time, because when you play Anyfin Can Happen, you want to know exactly what Murlocs you have coming out of the board. That's really important because it says summon 7 Murlocs that died this game. If you have 7 or fewer Murlocs in your deck and they've all been played, you know exactly what's going to happen, so you don't have to worry about that too much at all. So that tends to be the basis of how Murloc Paladins are played, and that also explains how the combos work as well. It also means if you're playing against a Murloc Paladin, you can keep track of what he or she has played so far and try and work out how close they are to getting ready to play Anyfin Can Happen. Or maybe you can work your way around making sure you don't take certain Murlocs out, or possibly if you're a rogue, for example, you're sapping Murlocs back, you might be entombing some of them strategically if you're a priest, and doing all sorts of things to try and disrupt their game. So that's the basic introduction for everything Murloc related that I'm going to be covering in this video on these screens anyway. What I'm going to do now is head into Hearthstone and show you guys a couple of different decks that you might want to try yourself on ladder. Alright, so we're inside Hearthstone now, and I've got 3 decks I want to show you today. There are many more than this. You can go and look them up on your favorite website of choice, but for now I'm going to take you through 3 of the decks that I think illustrate some of the concepts that we were going through earlier. The first one I'm going to go through is Neviilz Murloc, and this is not necessarily the easiest to play, but is certainly quite easy in terms of understanding. You basically have options to cycle through your deck, options to board clear, and basically you're surviving until the late game. And remember, Anyfin Can Happen is 10 mana. You are not playing this like a super aggro Murloc to face kind of Murloc deck. So everything you know about Murloc decks, forget about it. This is not how these decks are played. Some of them are really control-y, some of them are mid-rangey, but none of them go to face from beginning or anything like that, okay? So let's talk through some of the deck cycling strategies. You have 2 Hammer of Wraths in this deck. You also have 2 Lay on Hands, all fairly self-explanatory Paladin cards that let you pick up other cards. You then have some other really cool combinations. Now, you normally see Doomsayers, of course, in Freeze Mages, so you're thinking, what the heck is it doing there? Well, this is mainly to fight off really early aggro decks like Face Shamans, for example, or Face Hunters, and anything else that has a really strong board presence early game. Get rid of their board early, don't let them get a board, fine. And here's the really cool thing. Doomsayer destroys all minions at the start of your turn. What does that mean? It means you get to combo it with Solemn Vigil, which is so strong as a combination. I mean, that's just a fantastic Paladin card when you synergize it with this deck. So you have that, and in terms of board clear as well, if that isn't enough, you have turn 5 and turn 6 plays as well. On turn 5, you have Doomsayer Equality, which of course clears the entire board regardless of what's there. And on turn 6, you also have your typical Equality Consecrate. Good old Paladin staple. So there's plenty of board clear in this deck as well. You then have your True Silver Champions chucked in there for good measure, just to get rid of those extra sticky minions. And you have 2 anti-Keel bots to help you last until the late game. Finally, please note that this Neviilz Murloc deck uses the 22 damage version of the combo that we were talking about earlier. So you can see the 2 Bluegill Warriors there, you have the 2 Murloc War Leaders, and you have Anyfin Can Happen and Old Murkeye. So that's a 22 damage combo. So that is the Neviilz Murloc deck. So Thijs's Murloc is a little bit more in terms of what cards we're putting in, and as you can see, the first card on the list is Grimscale Oracle. So this runs the 30 damage version of the combo that we were talking about a little bit earlier. But on its own, Grimscale Oracle just isn't that good a card. It's a 1/1 for 1 mana, and if you play it out early on, it tends to get taken out. There are so many things that just deal 1 damage early on in the game. It's not that great. But if you need it as a combo to do 30 damage, it does allow you to do more burst, and depending on your playstyle, it can ultimately just be a lot more fun. So it entirely depends on how you prefer to play. Use the deck that you think best suits you. All of the decks are good. Some might be slightly better than others, but ultimately depends on what you find the most fun. Now, this deck is a little bit more varied. So if you take a look, we have cards like Cultmaster in here, and you're trying to use Cultmaster to cycle through some more of your cards. You have a Keeper of Alderman just for a little bit of control in case something scary pops up, or if you want to buff up one of your own minions as well, that's completely fine. And you can see a little bit of stickiness in 2 Piloted Shredders. We also have a Sludge Belcher in here as well, and good old Dr. Boom. So there is a reasonable amount of mid-ranginess coming out of here. And you still see we have the Anyfin Can Happen. Now, there are a couple of cards in this deck that Thijs himself says, well, you know, we can substitute these if you want. Knife Juggler, we're not really an aggro deck, so this could be substituted for something else, but it is still a good card because we have so many cheap minions. He's not entirely certain, for instance, about Solemn Vigil. There's only one of them, and we're not running any Doomsayers, so maybe we can substitute that for something else. And ultimately, he's thinking about substituting the Grimscale Oracles, because they are just the weakest minions in this deck. But assuming we keep those in, either of the cards we just mentioned could make way for a second Anyfin Can Happen, and we haven't spoken about that yet. There are some decks, although not in the three I'm showing you today, that just run 2 Anyfin Can Happens. And of course you can put a second one in this deck. Absolutely, why not? And the idea behind that is if you think the game's going really far, fine. Let's say your opponent has some sticky minions as well and it's really quite annoying. Imagine playing 1 Anyfin Can Happen, you do 30 damage, oh, but 15 of it goes to clearing his board, he's down to not very much health, and then you get to play a second one straight away. That's pretty boss. So the idea is to just keep going and add a second one in. It's that simple. So this is the Thijs Murloc. Possibly a little bit more complicated to play. There are loads of cards that you just have one of. You just have the 1 Zombie Chow, although that's fairly straightforward. Knife Juggler, 1 Cog Hammer. Keeper of Alderman tends to be reasonably situational. Solemn Vigil as well. You kind of need to engineer a good opportunity to use that. And you only have the 1 Lay on Hands. So now the third deck I want to talk to you about is the Spark Murloc. Spark is a legend player from France, and he has devised a version of this deck that's very mid-rangey, and personally is the one that I actually enjoy playing the most, because even if you don't 100% keep track of everything, although you should, don't be like me, it's still quite a lot of fun to play, and you get loads of different Murlocs, and if you want proof of that, we have 2 Murloc Knights. So the idea is you can constantly inspire and summon even more Murlocs and seriously overwhelm your opponent. And with this deck, quite often, you win games before you ever get to Anyfin Can Happen, which I think is particularly interesting. So you have Murloc Tidecaller here whenever Murloc is summoned +1 attack, yep. And then you have Sir Finley Mrglglglgl, which is so much fun. So generally speaking, the most versatile hero powers you can have in the game are probably the Mage hero power and the Druid hero power, because you can just ping anything you want. Against sort of aggro decks, you might want to think about using heal maybe, but it tends to be more useful later in the game than earlier on, when you just have way more trades going on. And against control-y stuff, well, you might want to go for Life Tap, for example, which would be absolutely excellent in a control matchup. So that's just great and really, really versatile. So the way this deck plays is so much fun because it's different every single game. You have your standard Knife Jugglers, shielded mini-bots, just the 1 Cog Hammer, Muster for Battle, Peacekeeper, you know, just to go ahead and manage your opponent's board a little bit, and double Sludge Belcher, Dr. Boom, and a Tyrian Fordring as well. So you can see a lot of the cards that are staple mid-range Paladin, which, by the way, in case you forgot, is just a really strong deck. They're all here as well, and I think out of 10 or 11 games I played with this deck yesterday and today, because I started the ladder season this month a little bit late because of other commitments, I managed to win something like 11 and lose 2 with this deck, but out of those 11 wins, only 2 of them were won when I played Anyfin Can Happen. It's just a really, really nice mid-range deck with a bunch of Murlocs in it as well. Now don't forget, you can also keep track of what Murlocs died and in what order to work out exactly what Anyfin Can Happen can do when you summon 7 extra Murlocs. If you have more than 7 Murlocs in your deck, or you happen to have summoned more than 7 in the game, obviously this gets a little bit more tricky. You're going to have to keep remembering, right, what is it that this card is going to summon out on the board for me? But it's a good mental exercise anyway, and hey, if you're able to do that, you can correctly predict every time exactly what's going to happen when you play that card. So you could play a version of this deck with 2 of these, for example, although I personally wouldn't recommend it because I win so many of my games with this deck before I can even play this card that actually I feel like adding a second one in there might make the deck weaker, because more often than not I don't need to use it at all. So these are 3 decks that you could be playing as part of your Murloc Paladin experiments here, or you could use the ideas from them to build your own deck. It's really entirely up to you. What I've done here is hopefully explain some of the basics of what a Murloc Paladin looks like and why, so that you can then go away and use some of these ideas, some of these concepts, and some of these deck building skills to go and maybe make your own deck, or just find the playstyle that suits you. Whether you're using 22 combo, 30 combo, if you're not using any specific combo at all like the last deck we looked at, or if you want to try something different, integrating Murloc Paladin into something else, because the versatility of Anyfin Can Happen as a card has changed the meta after League of Explorers for good, and has really made the matchup that much more interesting, because there are loads of different kind of deck combos that you can come up with. So I hope you've enjoyed this short guide. Please let me know in the comments what you think, or if you've tried anything in particular that has happened to work well for you that you'd like to share, go ahead and let me know about it as well. Thank you very much for your likes and subscribes on the video. As always, they help out a lot. And at the end of this video, of course, you will see an end card that links to some gameplay from Murloc Paladin as well. So if you want to watch some more gameplay, go ahead and click on that video. But that's it from me for now, folks. Hope you've enjoyed, and we'll see you next time for more Hearthstone. Take care.